6 months in the US Army, and I still haven't gotten used to military life. As I was marching down the base hall in Washington following the lieutenant's orders, my heart started pounding when I saw my name on the list for a mandatory medical exam. Sergeant Jackson Reynolds, 28 years old. Medical exam with Captain Tucker at 3:02 p.m. Just hearing that name made my knees go weak. Captain Derek Tucker was a legend on base. Tall, broad-shouldered, with perfectly trimmed salt and pepper hair and a presence that commanded instant respect. A decorated veteran who, after 2 missions in the Middle East, returned to lead the medical department. Every soldier talked about him with a mix of admiration and fear. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. My barracks were in an isolated area of the base, a set of old buildings surrounded by vast training fields. The peeling cream-colored walls told stories of generations of soldiers who had been there before me. Early in the morning, the sound of a bugle replaced any alarm clock, and our day started with exhausting exercises followed by tactical training that pushed every limit of my body. Before joining the Army, I worked as a mechanic in a small shop in Montana. After a devastating divorce 2 years ago, I decided I needed discipline and structure. The Army seemed like the perfect choice to rebuild my life. Now, as I put my perfectly folded uniform into the metal locker, I wondered if I had made the right choice. "Reynolds, have you had your exam with Tucker yet?" Carter, my bunkmate, asked, while meticulously cleaning his boots. "Later today," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. "Good luck, man. Old Tucker is meticulous." Something in Carter's tone made me uneasy, like there was a hidden meaning behind his words. In the afternoon, the sky was loaded with gray clouds when I walked through the central courtyard toward the medical building. The red brick structure stood out against the base's predominant gray. Inside, the smell of antiseptic hit me as the receptionist directed me straight to room 4. "Come in, Sergeant Reynolds." Captain Tucker's deep voice echoed as I knocked on the door. He was sitting behind a metal desk, studying my file intently. "Close the door." The exam room was surprisingly cozy by military standards. A large window let in natural light, highlighting the various medals and diplomas on the walls. The captain stood up, revealing his impressive stature. "First exam since you enlisted?" he asked as he motioned to the gurney for me to sit down. "Yes, sir." My voice came out weaker than I'd intended. "Take off your shirt, Sergeant. Let's check your vitals." While I removed the top of the uniform, I noticed the captain's gaze trailing over my chest. It wasn't a clinical look. There was something more there. Something that sent shivers down my spine. Captain Tucker's fingers were surprisingly warm against my chest as he placed the stethoscope. "Take a deep breath," he said, his face close enough for me to feel his minty breath. "Your heart's racing, Sergeant." "It must be nerves, sir," I murmured, unable to explain the strange feeling growing inside me. The exam carried on with a palpable tension in the air. Every touch from the captain seemed to linger longer than necessary. Every glance carried an indescribable weight. When his fingers moved lower to examine my abdomen, an electric jolt shot up my spine. "I noticed you came from Montana," he commented casually, his eyes fixed on mine. "What brought you to the Army, Reynolds?" "I was looking for structure, sir. After my divorce, I needed a fresh start." Something shifted in his gaze. "I know exactly how that feels." His hand moved a bit lower, crossing over the line of my belt. "Sometimes we find things we weren't even looking for." My breath caught. That touch wasn't medical at all, and we both knew it. An internal conflict exploded in my mind. The military hierarchy, professionalism, all the things I'd been taught about proper behavior clashing with the undeniable attraction I'd never felt before. "Captain," my voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper. I couldn't form a complete sentence while his hand remained still, hovering on the edge of what would be appropriate. The silence between us magnified every little sound, the ticking of the clock on the wall, my uneven breathing, the soft rustle of fabric when I shifted uncomfortably. Tucker slowly withdrew his hand, his eyes never leaving mine. "Turn around, Sergeant. I need to check your spine." I obeyed automatically, as I'd been trained to do. Years of military conditioning had me following orders without question, even as all the internal alarms went off. With my back turned to him, I felt strangely vulnerable. His fingers traced down my spine with methodical precision, starting at the nape and slowly working their way down. "Excellent posture, Reynolds. I see you take your training seriously." "Thank you, sir," I replied, shivers running all over me. "Ever been on a field mission?" he asked while his hands continued the exam, moving to my shoulders, massaging the tense muscles with a pressure that felt more therapeutic than diagnostic. "Not yet, sir. I'm on the waiting list for the next assignment. He made a thoughtful sound. I can see why. You're in top shape. His hands then moved to my lower back, applying pressure on specific points. Does it hurt here? No, sir. And here? His fingers slid to my waist, crossing the line of professionalism. My whole body tensed. His touch awakened sensations I'd been suppressing for, well, maybe forever. Feelings I'd never allowed myself to acknowledge or explore. In the hyper-masculine environment of the Army, such thoughts were strictly suppressed. Sergeant Reynolds? He pressed, his voice lower, more intimate. No, sir. I finally managed to reply, my voice betraying the inner turmoil I felt. He abruptly stepped back. You can get dressed now, Sergeant. The exam is over. I turned around, taken aback by the sudden shift. The captain had returned to his desk and was scribbling something in my file, avoiding my gaze. I quickly put my shirt back on, fumbling with the buttons. Any specific complaints I should note? He asked formally, as if the last few minutes hadn't happened. None, sir. Excellent. You're dismissed, Sergeant. I left the exam room in shock, my mind trying to process everything that had just gone down. The corridor seemed to sway in front of me as I mechanically made my way back to the barracks. What the hell was that about? Was I imagining things? Or was I misinterpreting a normal medical procedure because of my own internal confusion? At the mess hall, I found Carter sitting alone in a corner, dispassionately poking at his meal. I sat down in front of him, still dazed. So, how was the exam? He asked, a knowing smile playing on his lips. Normal, I lied, unable to speak the truth. Just the standard routine. Carter leaned forward, lowering his voice. You know, the captain has his own methods of examining his favorite patients, right? My blood went cold. What are you talking about? Come on, Reynolds. Don't act like you don't know. Tucker has a reputation. I'm not the only one who left that room questioning what just happened. He chuckled shortly, humorless. Why do you think no one complains? Half are too confused to admit it, and the other half, well, the other half come back for follow-up exams. I fell silent, absorbing his words. So it wasn't just me. I wasn't imagining things. A mix of relief and new confusion flooded over me. And you? I finally managed to ask. What did you do? Carter shrugged, his gaze distant. Let's just say I discovered more about myself in that exam room than in 26 years of living. He got up, grabbing his tray. Just be careful, Reynolds. This isn't the kind of thing the Army openly tolerates. I spent the next few hours in a daze, mechanically carrying out my duties while my mind replayed every moment, every touch, every shared look with Captain Tucker. During the afternoon physical training, while running the base perimeter, I found myself looking for him in the administrative buildings. During weapons cleaning, my thoughts drifted to his hands, wondering what they might have done if I hadn't clearly tensed up. At night, lying on my narrow bunk in the barracks with the soft snoring of fellow soldiers filling the air, I couldn't sleep. My mind was at war with itself. On one hand, I knew clearly that what happened bordered on harassment. He was my superior, and I was in a vulnerable position. On the other, I couldn't deny the inexplicable attraction I felt, the burning curiosity about what might have happened if I'd responded differently. The next morning, a notice awaited me with breakfast. Sergeant Reynolds, report to Captain Tucker at 7 p.m. for a discussion of your exam results. My stomach jumped. It wasn't standard procedure to discuss results in person. Usually they were just filed in our records. Special summons? Carter asked, peeking over my shoulder. Welcome to the club. There was a note of bitterness in his voice that I couldn't fully decipher. The day dragged on like never before. Every minute felt like an hour as I struggled to focus on my tasks, failing miserably. At 6:45 p.m., I found myself standing in front of the medical building again. The night sky painted in shades of purple and orange as the sun set. The lights in the exam room were on, but the rest of the building looked deserted. I knocked on the door exactly at 7 p.m. Come in, Reynolds. The captain's voice sounded different. Not the formal military tone from before. Just my last name. No rank. The exam room had transformed. The clinical, bright light from earlier in the day had been replaced by the soft glow of lamps. On the desk were 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. Definitely not by the book. Tucker wasn't wearing his medical coat, just a simple black t-shirt that outlined his impressive physique. For the first time, I noticed the tribal tattoo stretching across his right arm, disappearing under the sleeve, another detail his uniform usually hid. Close the door, he instructed, pouring the amber liquid into the glasses. And lock it. I hesitated for a moment, but complied. The click of the lock felt like sealing some sort of unspoken pact. Sit down, Jackson. Using my first name immediately made it clear that we were past military protocols now. I took the offered glass, sipping deeply, grateful for the familiar warmth that washed over my throat and momentarily calmed my nerves. "I guess you've got questions," he said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "Yeah, a few," I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. "Mostly about yesterday." "And about yourself?" he suggested slyly. I swallowed hard. "Maybe." Tucker swirled the liquid in his glass, thoughtful. "In my 15 years in the Army, I've learned to spot certain signs, things that men try to hide, even from themselves." His gaze was penetrating, like he could see right through all my carefully built defenses. "You're showing those signs, Jackson." "I don't know what you mean," I replied automatically, my defense kicking in. He smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course you do. That's why you're here now, isn't it? You could have reported yesterday's incident as misconduct. You could have asked for another doctor. But you're here, alone, after hours." My heart hammered against my ribs. He was right, of course. Every word was a truth I didn't want to face. "What happened yesterday?" I started, not knowing how to finish the sentence. "It wasn't a mistake," he finished, his voice low and firm. "I was testing the limits, yes, but I wasn't wrong about you." He got up and circled around the desk, stopping directly in front of me. Standing there, his presence was even more dominant. Instinctively, I stood up too, as if my body was responding to some unspoken command. We were just inches away, the air between us charged with tension. I could feel the heat radiating from him, his woodsy cologne mixed with the scent of whiskey. "Tell me to stop, and I will," he murmured, raising his hand as if to touch my face. "Tell me I misread the signs, and we'll never speak of this again." His hand hovered just above my skin, waiting for permission. The moment stretched on, each second an eternity of possibilities and consequences. My mind screamed about regulations, consequences, my carefully constructed identity. But my body knew the truth I had been denying. I tilted my face toward his hand, closing my eyes as I felt the warmth of his touch against my cheek. A sigh escaped my lips. Part surrender, part relief. His fingers slid to the nape of my neck, pulling me closer until our breaths mingled. When his lips met mine, it was as if something inside me just broke. Years of military denial and repression crumbling like a house of cards. The kiss started hesitantly, almost reverently, but quickly turned into something more urgent, desperate. My hands found their way to his chest, feeling his heartbeat pounding just as frantically as mine. He pressed me against the table, his arms holding me with a grip that bordered on possessive. "I've been waiting for this since you walked in yesterday," he confessed against my lips. "The way you looked at me, I just knew." I couldn't form the words. Instead, I let my body speak, my hands exploring his torso, discovering the firmness of his muscles under the fabric of his t-shirt. When he removed it, revealing a chiseled chest and the full display of that tribal tattoo snaking along his arm and part of his shoulder, I felt as if I were in the presence of some ancient deity. His fingers worked the buttons on my shirt with surprising dexterity, removing it with military efficiency. "So perfect," he murmured, tracing the contours of my defined abs, exactly as I imagined. Time seemed suspended as we explored this unknown territory about one another. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word was a discovery, not just of each other's bodies, but of a part of me I'd always known was there but never dared to acknowledge. When we finally came together completely, it was like the outside world had disappeared. There was no army, no ranks, no rules, just two men connecting in a world that often forced us apart. Our bodies moved in perfect sync, as if we were made for each other. The climax hit like a storm, wild, inevitable, and utterly overwhelming. We collapsed together on the table, breathless, sweaty, changed. In the silence that followed, while our bodies were still intertwined and our breathing slowly returned to normal, reality began to seep back in. What we had done violated every military code. It could end our careers, our reputations, everything we'd worked for. Tucker seemed to read my thoughts. "No one needs to know," he said softly, his fingers drawing lazy patterns on my back. "What happens in this exam room stays in this exam room." I pulled away slightly to look into his eyes. "Carter knows. About you. About this." A mysterious smile crossed his lips. "Carter has his own secrets to keep." The implication hit me like a punch in the gut. "You and him. The past is the past," he replied simply. "It's you who's here now." As we started dressing, the magnitude of what had happened finally sank in. It wasn't just about sex or physical desire. It was about allowing myself to be who I really was, for the first time in my life. "What happens now?" I asked, buttoning my shirt with slightly trembling fingers. Tucker adjusted his t-shirt, his face returning to that professional mask he wore during the day. "That depends on you, Sergeant Reynolds. I could request a transfer for you to another unit if that makes things easier." The formality in his voice hurt more than it should have. "Is that what you want?" He paused, his eyes softening for a moment. "No, that's not what I want." "Then what do you want?" I pressed. "I want to explore this," he answered with surprising honesty. "I want to find out what might exist between us, beyond these walls. But you need to understand the risks. In the Army, there's no room for that." I considered his words carefully. My whole life had been defined by expectations. My parents, my ex-wife, my superiors in the military. I'd always been what others expected me to be. I'd never really allowed myself to be authentic. "I accept the risks," I finally decided. The feeling of freedom that came with those words was indescribable. Tucker nodded, a genuine smile lighting up his face. "Tomorrow I have a day off. I have a cabin in the mountains, 2 hours from here. Isolated, private. I'm going to need permission to leave the base," I commented, thinking of the practical obstacles. "I've already taken care of that. A special reconnaissance mission, strictly confidential." There was a mischievous glint in his eyes. I smiled, amazed at his foresight. "Looks like you already had everything planned out, Captain." "Derek," he corrected. "When it's just the two of us, call me Derek." "Derek," I repeated, savoring the intimacy of using his first name. He came in for one last kiss. Softer this time, more promising. "See you tomorrow, Jackson." I left the exam room transformed. The world felt different, more vivid, more real, more possible. The night air carried promises I'd never allowed myself to imagine. On my way back to the barracks, I found Carter sitting alone on the outer perimeter, smoking a cigarette. Another violation of regulations. "Tucker called you in, huh?" he asked as I approached. There was no malice in his voice now, just a resigned sort of understanding. I sat next to him, accepting the cigarette he offered, even though I rarely smoked. "Yeah. And?" I took a long drag, letting the smoke fill my lungs before exhaling slowly. "And you were right. I discovered more about myself in that exam room than in 28 years of life." We sat in silence for several minutes, watching the stars above us. "Was it worth it?" I finally asked. "The risk?" Carter considered the question for a long moment. "Some days, I think yes. Other days," he shrugged. "But I guess the real question is, what's the alternative? Living a lie for the rest of your life?" His words echoed deep within me. For years I'd been living a half-life, suppressing essential parts of who I was. The Army had given me the structure I needed after my divorce, but it had also reinforced walls around my true self. Maybe it was time to start tearing down those walls. "Thank you," I said to Carter, returning the cigarette. He nodded, understanding that my gratitude went beyond that shared moment. "Just be careful, Reynolds. He's still a captain, and you're still a sergeant. Some lines aren't meant to be crossed." I thought about his warning as I walked the rest of the way back to the barracks. The night was clear, the stars shining brightly over Washington. Tomorrow I'd head to the mountains with Derek. Tomorrow I'd take the next step on this unexpected journey. What would come next? I had no idea, but for the first time in a long while, I was eager to find out. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and tell me in the comments, what would you